Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first session of our book club for the School Discipline Fix. I'm very excited to see everyone here. We are giving an extra minute or two because folks were still rolling in at a very quick pace, but we're so happy that everyone is here. You'll see my colleague and co-author, Dr. Stuart Ablon, here with us, and I am Alisha Pollastri. Together we wrote this book, The School Discipline Fix. I am just planning on doing a few minutes of general introduction, and then we are going to jump right into it to maximize the time that we have with you today. First, very quickly, because I know folks are coming in from all over the place. Some of you know our organization very well, and some of you may not. And so I want to make sure that you know where we are coming from. We are from an organization, a program called Think Kids. It's a program in the psychiatry department at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. And our organization very specifically is here to refine and work on the collaborative problem-solving approach and train people like yourselves, educators, also clinicians and parents, to use this approach to help people understand and better treat children who exhibit challenging behaviors. We wrote this book because there was no guide of its, at that time, there was no guide really helping educators use collaborative problem solving in schools. And when I say educators, I mean individual educators using collaborative problem solving with their students, as well as figuring out how to implement it school-wide for those that wanted to do this as a school-wide approach to school discipline and behavior management. So we're delighted that the book has been very popular. We're delighted that all of you are here today to join with us in this book club and to learn more about collaborative problem solving. So that's who we are, but who are you? Here's what we know just from the registration for this book club. Most of you are from the United States, although we have at least one participant from Alaska, which I'm excited about. So when I say the US, I mean the US very broadly. Also some Canadian colleagues and folks from as far away as Australia, although I hope that they have taken us up on our opportunity to listen to the recording rather than being here live. But if you are live from Australia, please raise your hand and give us a wave, because is that you, Lucas? I see your thumbs up. You're coming from Australia. Very, very impressive, considering the time difference. So thank you for being here. We're so delighted to have you. 92% of you have not attended a Think Kids training. So that means that we are very new to very many of you, which we're very excited about. This is a great way to get introduced to Think Kids and to collaborative problem solving. Most of you are working in schools, and that's mostly K-12 schools, some early ed, some colleges, but a bulk of you there in the middle, kindergarten to 12th grade. We also have a few parents who have joined to, it sounds like, to help understand how to get the schools that their children go to know about CPS and use CPS. Also a couple folks from nonprofit agencies and a couple students, especially university students. So welcome to all of you. 20% or so of you are from districts that are implementing collaborative problem solving school-wide. We'll talk about school-wide implementation much, much more in session 3 of this series of 3. But for those of you that are coming from our partners that are doing this school-wide, welcome, and we hope we can fill in some of the blanks for you today. 12% of you are from the recent National Association for School Psychologists Conference. So you may have met me or met Dr. Stuart Ablon before. We were both there, and we are happy that you're here. I know a number of our audience members are coming from there. And we have a handful of you that can't get enough of CPS. You're from our CPS certified community. Those are folks that have been through our whole round of training, tier 1 training, tier 2 training, individual support and coaching, to the point that they are CPS certified by Think Kids to go out and practice the approach with fidelity. And in some cases, if they're CPS certified trainers, they also have the stamp of approval from us to go do CPS training. So welcome to our CPS certified community members. Just a reminder to everyone that we have 3 of these book club sessions. They'll all be live and be recorded. You are here, obviously, in the first one, live. Today, we'll be talking about the first third of the book, chapters 1 to 5, Rethinking Challenging Behaviors. But make sure your calendars are marked for session 2 and session 3. In session 2, we'll be talking more about collaborative problem solving. That is the Plan B process, how to do Plan B. And then in the third session on June 7th, that's when we'll talk about school-wide implementation. And so we'll love to see some repeat attendees at those. Also, just a reminder, I know most of you have probably heard this and seen it in your registration materials, but you can also lead a book club to go along with this book. And we have a free resource for you, a PDF guide that helps you go through chapter by chapter. So if you like this book club or you liked the book and you want to get this going at your school, great way to start is with a book club. So make sure that you go and you download that free guide for yourselves. Finally, if you know CPS, you know that the very first step is setting clear expectations, because you can't have a problem without having an expectation that isn't met. So I just want to make sure that my expectations and our expectations are clear for today. So number one, you are probably seeing that this meeting is being recorded. Your participation in this meeting is your consent for that recording. And certainly if your face is on the screen and you're speaking up, you may be identifiable in that recording. So I just wanted to make sure that disclaimer was out there. Also, I mentioned this is the first third of the book, chapters 1 to 5. So the topics that we'll be talking about are the philosophy of CPS, the assessment, and the 3 plans. That's a lot to cover in an hour or so. We'll give about 15 minutes of time to each one of those. If we get questions that are outside of that and are really better for session 2 and 3, just know that we may hold on to those questions and save them for one of the other sessions, because we really want this to be focused and to get to all those questions that are about those topics. And speaking of which, we want this to be heavy on discussion. We are not here to present. This isn't a webinar on purpose. We really want this to be a discussion. So we'll orient you to the topic at hand for that 15 minutes or so, and then we're opening it up. If you can, I know that sometimes there are extenuating circumstances. If you can put your camera on, we would love that. We have some questions submitted in advance, and we will be sure to get to those. If you have questions that come up as we talk, you can either raise your hand and we'll have you unmute and talk to us, or you can submit questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat. We also have a couple folks here, Lindsay and Naomi and Amifika, also from Think Kids, that are here helping us monitor that chat and the time. So we'll be keeping track of all of that as we go. I don't think I forgot anything. Stuart or someone else from Think Kids, feel free to interrupt me if I did. Otherwise, I know I want to get into the content. I'm sure everyone else does too. So let me introduce, to start our first topic, Dr. Stuart Ablon.
All right. Thank you, Alisha. And great to see you all here. Thanks for joining us. Like Alisha said, if you feel comfortable turning on your camera, that's wonderful, because I have to say, it is nice to see some familiar faces here. I see some familiar names too, and I'm assuming the faces are behind the black boxes there, but it's great to see some familiar folks. So as Alisha said, I'm just going to kick it off with a very quick overview of the opening of the book, and we're going to open it up for questions and discussion. So, you know, the book really opens where we open whenever we're talking about collaborative problem solving in schools. And that is that, you know, your understanding of a problem, in this case, challenging behavior, should go about determining the solutions that you use to try to address that problem. And it's been a long time now in schools that we've sort of held on to this notion that if kids are exhibiting challenging behavior, it is probably about them using their difficult behavior in order to get stuff like attention or get out of stuff, like, for instance, work of all kinds. And that thinking, that conventional thinking about what gives rise to behavioral challenges in our schools is what then leads to traditional school discipline, which is pretty much oriented around motivational approaches, rewards and consequences, trying to incentivize kids to behave well. And why would you focus on trying to incentivize kids to behave well? Well, only if you think that the reason they're not behaving well is a lack of incentive to behave well. But hopefully, as everybody knows from the book here, that actually doesn't reflect what research in the neurosciences for some time has showed us. And what it's shown us is that actually, this is not what's getting in the way for kids who struggle to manage their behavior. It's not that they lack the will to behave well. What they lack are the skills to behave well. And that, in essence, we might as well think about this like we've learned to think about other learning disabilities, except instead of this being about reading and math and writing, this is about things like problem solving, flexibility, frustration tolerance. And in this first section of the book, one of the things that I think tried to make very clear is that, this is not really about saying, hey, you should never use incentives in a school ever, that you should, all rewards, punishments should be banned from our schools. No, really what we were saying is, you know what? You should use those things for things they work for and not for things they don't work for. And most kids who exhibit chronic challenging behavior, those are kids who it's not just as simple as they don't know what's expected of them or aren't trying hard enough to do those things and need some motivation. It's more complicated. It's about skill, not will. It's about kids who have reason to distrust relationships with authority figures. And it's about kids who have a very sort of tuned up stress response and get very activated, especially when there's a threat of a consequence looming in front of them. So the first part of the book was all about this shift in thinking. From kids do well if they wanna, we just gotta make them wanna, to kids do well if they can, to all students wanna do well. And if they're not doing well, this is about skill, not will. And that thinking sets the stage for everything that we're going to talk about the rest of today and in each of our subsequent meetings as well. So that's my really brief orientation to the first part of the book, to moving away from conventional wisdom and to a more accurate, I would argue, humane and compassionate, helpful understanding of what's getting in students' way. So let's open it up here and see what comments and questions you all have. As Alisha said, you saw on the slide, feel free to type it right into us in the chat or raise your hand. And when we said raise your hand, there's a little reaction button you can click on the bottom, because if you just raise your hand the old school way, we might not see you. So, click the reactions and raise your hand, and we'll unmute you and ask you to chime in. So fire away, please, folks. This is what we're here for.
Hey, Stuart, to get things started, one person had submitted a question relevant to this topic, which is, how do you respond to others who perceive collaborating with a child is rewarding their behavior?
Well, I think if somebody thinks that way, that probably what you should do is probably just try to use consequences to teach them that that's not the right way to think about this. Thank you, some people, for paying attention and laughing there. I'm being facetious. And so, if you've read far enough along in the book and you have some sense of what collaborative problem solving is all about, you're going to know that we don't like to answer questions with like, how do you convince somebody of something by saying, well, here's the magic answer. No, I mean, actually, what you're probably going to need to do is you're probably going to need to start by understanding where they're coming from, which is basically to be asking them, okay, so what makes you think that actually collaborating with somebody would come across as rewarding a child? Fill me in. I want to hear more about this, because you're going to need to unpack what they have to say here. But the reality is you're also going to want to get back to the fact that you're only getting concerned about rewarding a kid's behavior if you think the whole reason the kid is behaving this way in the first place is because they're seeking some contingent responses from adults. And so we need to go back to, but that's not my understanding of why this kid's behaving poorly in the first place. Now, somebody might say, oh, you don't think they're sort of, looking for connection like that? I would say, well, if they are, there's much better ways to do that. So clearly this kid's struggling with some skills they would need to be able to ask for attention and demand attention in more appropriate ways. So that's sort of what I'm curious about here.
Elisa, looks like you have a question. You were first one up. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Excellent, we can.
Okay. Yeah, it wasn't a question. I was just going to add on to what Dr. Ablon said. in response to the question, which is, if it's responding to the child in the moment, that might be viewed as rewarding the behavior from a conventional lens. But I think the focus of this model on addressing concerns proactively, right, not in the heat of the moment, and when the child is in the headspace to be able to remain regulated, in a way you're if you want to think of it that way, in a way you're rewarding that behavior, which is a positive thing.
And we'll cover that some, sort of the difference in what you're describing, which is handling something in the moment versus more proactively, which is always, of course, the better thing to do, but it's also very challenging in our schools, particularly in the last 3 years. I mean, we have observed that people's time, bandwidth, capacity to approach things proactively during the pandemic has just plummeted. Everybody's sort of putting out fires right and left. But it's a very good point you make.
Right, putting out fires, and in remote learning, and there was a period of time where we got the question every other day about how do you have proactive plan B conversations when the only time I see those students anymore is when I'm in a screen like this with 25 other kids around. Very, very challenging. T. Taylor, did you give up on us?
Absolutely not. No, thank you so much for hosting this event. I appreciate it. So you said, Stuart, we need to use incentives for when they work and not for when they don't work.
Yeah.
So when do they work?
Okay, good. I snuck that in on you. You were paying attention there. Yeah. So one of the things we talk about in the book a little bit is that, this is not just sort of our view of things, that the reality is that rewards and consequences, what makes up sort of traditional school discipline, those things didn't come out of nowhere. It's not like people just invented them in schools for school discipline. They grew out of operant theory in psychology. And approaches based on motivating kids to behave better. What are they good at? They're good at reminding kids what's expected of them. Now, I want to be clear, they're not the only way. You don't need a reward or a consequence to remind a kid what's expected of them, but that is one way to teach a kid sort of what you want them to do and not do, the difference between right and wrong. And it is a way to motivate them to do those things. So what I always say to people is, hey, look, if this kid's behaving badly because they don't know what you want them to do or not do, or just aren't trying hard enough, well, your reward or consequence might work. But if it's anything other than that, you would be what I call barking up the wrong therapeutic tree, because those are the things that rewards and consequences do well. And what do they not do well? Right? They don't build neurocognitive skills. They don't build helping relationships, and they don't help people stay calm in the midst of frustration. In fact, they add, they amp people up. They add emotional fuel to the fire when there's sort of a threat of a consequence or even the promise of a reward out there. It sort of is more activating. So that's my list of what they do and what they don't do. Does that help clarify? And I think the reason that question is so important is don't get into a battle with somebody about you saying there's no consequence. I said, no, there can be consequences of course. Let's just use them for things they work for. Let's not use them for things they don't work for. And when people say, well, are you saying that traditional school discipline is all wrong? I'll say, no, I'm not blaming traditional school discipline. I'm blaming us for using it for things it was never intended to be used for. And then being surprised when it doesn't work. And it makes matters worse. So, it's just a mismatch.
I'm curious, even if folks don't have questions, if anyone has any reflections on that, because I can imagine some folks that are hearing about this for the first time or that just read this book recently are thinking, whoa, wait a second, that's just about everything we use in schools. Is anyone thinking that? What does traditional school discipline look like? What do rewards and consequences look like in your school? Jenny?
I would just speak to the kind of the convincing of others. And I do find that concern about reinforcing behaviors that are of concern. But what I like to try to promote is that what we're reinforcing is collaboration, right? If we're worried about what we're reinforcing, if reinforcement in and of itself is thrilling to a kid, then that's a great kind of reinforcement, and that's what we want to see. The timing of it can be tricky, but we want to see that kids are collaborating and learning, that back and forth conversational participation. That's a really wonderful thing to be reinforcing. So that's kind of what I've mentioned to teams that have
Yeah.
similar concerns.
Jenny, it's a great point, and I would describe that, what you're describing, as sort of relationally rewarding. And having things be relationally rewarding is super important for anything you're trying to do to help somebody. Any new skill you're trying to build, that's something happen in the context of a relationally rewarding situation. So yeah, we ought to expand our notion of sort of, what reinforcement looks like as well. So Alisha, I think before we sort of scoot on a little bit and get more into the details here, there's one other question that was submitted ahead of time, sort of a big one, but I think it's important to address here, which is, how do you link this work to policy development, right? Big question. And I guess I'd just like to note something, that right in the beginning, I was talking about how, we tend to think that kids are using their behavior to get stuff or avoid stuff. And that, I bet this audience realizes that's not me talking casually. That's built into the structures of many of our schools, particularly in the United States, where if you have to complete a functional analysis of behavior, you have sort of two boxes you get to choose from of what's the function of the kid's behavior. Is it to seek or to avoid? And then that leads you right to what the interventions can be. So there's actually been big lawsuits by child advocate groups here in the US saying that our kids are, services are limited, they're constrained because the FBA process actually doesn't make room for what we've learned in the last few decades. Because in addition to the potential function of the behavior, what we ought to be assessing is, what skills does a student struggle with? Where are there delays in their neurocognitive skills that are causing those challenging behaviors? Because of course, if that's what you're indicating, the natural growth out of that is, okay, so the interventions have to address those skills. And there's massive policy implications there. If we think about, in essence, revising the FBA process and then the set of interventions that are supplied as a result.
Excellent. Thank you. Stuart, do you want to get to Melody?
Yeah, let's get to Melody, and then we'll go to the next piece, I think. That'd be
okay,
great.
Sounds good. Go ahead, Melody.
Okay, I'm trying to unmute myself, put the camera on. Let's see. Oh, here I am.
There you are. Now that you're on, just stay on, please. Nice to see
Thank you. So, when you talk about connection to policy, I was a special ed teacher for 40 years. And throughout that time, I sadly would say that infrequently, the things that we did would connect to, the curriculum, and it would connect to school policy. But when we discussed it, either amongst ourselves or with parents or community members, that connection was not made repeatedly clear. Mm-hmm. Collaboration is part of teamwork, problem solving. Where I worked, it was a competency-based system. So being able to communicate with people, that's part of your ELA standards and benchmarks, whatever you're using. But it's also part of your social emotional curriculum.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Well,
so
go ahead.
I was just going to say, so I think when we're training teachers, which I've done that. I've taught some college level courses. Some of these things are just like habits, practices that we need to do as educators, because, the dots are already there, as you're saying about the research, they're already there. People have connected them. I would say to people, I'm not making this up. That's not within my realm. If I study your techniques and they're going to work for some of the students, I'm going to implement them with fidelity and make sure that they're it's not just me doing it. We all have to be doing it. And the parents need to be, everybody needs to have some training and understanding. So thank you for the work that you do, because it does work. I've seen it.
Welcome, and thank you for advocating for it and practicing it. And I think people who work on the policy side, what they say is, we're going to have advocates like you who are going to naturally gravitate to this and do this and follow the research. But we need policy change so that there's structures in place so that everybody starts to do this. Those are the kinds of things that can guide, FBA process, the behavior intervention planning, which we're going to talk about momentarily as well. So, all right, thank you. Melody, Alisha, do you want to jump into the next section here?
Yes, I mentioned to everyone that we were going to try very hard to stick to about 15 minutes for each of the 3 topics. So I'm going to jump into the next one, which is about assessment. And we're talking about, if you're following along at home, we're talking about chapters 3 and 4 here in the book. And it's nice, Stuart already covered some of the pieces for me. One of the key points is about the difference between a traditional FBA and an assessment, the way we talk about it with collaborative problem solving. Not to say, by the way, that you can't use your FBA forms. We've actually gotten to be pros at modifying FBA forms a little bit to make sure that they're CPS consistent. So within the existing process, and we know that schools that you have your processes, within the existing processes, you too can make your FBA look more CPS consistent. So let's talk for a minute, make sure that the point was clear in the book. And when I say in the book, I'm talking about in chapter 3, box 3.1, there's a picture that makes this really, really clear what I'm about to describe. And that's the difference between the CPS assessment and the traditional FBA. Traditional FBAs focus on, as Stuart just said, the behavior and the function. There's an assumed function of the behavior. The challenging behavior is there because it gets or avoids something. And the structure in FBA has you looking to say, what is the function? Why is the child engaging in the behavior? Because it must be getting them something or helping them to avoid something. In collaborative problem solving, we put that on its head a little bit. And we think of that challenging behavior as simply the downstream effect of a child not being able to handle an expectation or a trigger. And in fact, in our assessment process, the challenging behavior itself, whether it be swearing or leaving the room or flipping a desk or yelling at a teacher, whatever that may be, we almost see that as extraneous to the assessment. Because what we find more important, and you can see it in that box 3.1, is the antecedent. What was it in their environment? What trigger or expectation was there that they couldn't adaptively handle? And why couldn't they adaptively handle it? And those are the 5 areas of lagging neurocognitive skills that may be getting in the way. And if you identify what was the problem, the trigger or the expectation, and what was the skill that led them to not be able to handle it adaptively, you both understand that behavior is just a downstream effect, and you have your intervention point, because your intervention point is one of 2 things. You can adapt the environment. You can accommodate whatever it is that's going on in the environment to lower the expectation to a point they can meet it. Or ideally, you want to build the skills they need to handle that trigger or unmet expectation. And if you do that, and they can handle that trigger or unmet expectation better in the future, that challenging behavior goes away on its own. You didn't need to intervene on that challenging behavior. You intervened earlier upstream, and the downstream effect is that the challenging behavior itself goes away. So that is a key difference between CPS and traditional assessment in schools and traditional FBAs. And so I wanted to hang on to that point a little bit. And then the other key thing that you see in this book, and we've got it in the appendix, it's Appendix A, is our collaborative problem solving assessment and planning tool, or we call it the CPS Apt. That's how we do our assessment. We barely focus on the challenging behaviors. We put them down, we put them where they belong. And then we really focus in on the triggers and unmet expectations and the lagging skills, because those are our intervention points. And we hope that you can use that CPS Apt. There's an updated version that's available both on our website, and I'll put it in the chat stream in a little while. You can go to our website, thinkkids.org, go to the section on For Educators, and it's at the bottom there. But again, I'll also put it in the chat here for attendees that are here live with us. So we hope that that understanding of the difference with the FBA and our assessment tool together will help you do a more thorough assessment. So now let's hear, what are your questions about that or your experiences either with traditional FBAs or with our CPS assessment and planning tool?
Again, feel free to type in the chat, raise your hand.
Just a
Melody, I'm just
quick
going to
question.
see if anybody else wants to chime in, just so we spread the opportunity around first. But see your
Can I
hand.
just ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course.
So in the app, is this a brand new form? Because it looks different than one that I
Yes.
am filling out currently.
Yes, but it's the same stuff. We reorganized it, so there are a couple differences. So the one that's in the book in Appendix A is probably the older one that you may have, that some folks are using. It's got all the same stuff. The new one that you can find on our website and that I just put in the text stream, the same stuff, reorganized a little bit, easier to fill out, but it also adds an important thing. We had a lot of folks tell us in the old version, hey, there's no place to indicate what we're doing in the meantime. If we assign a certain problem, if we've got these problems, the expectations and the triggers, and we know that 2 of them we're going to try and plan B as soon as we can, and then a bunch of other things, what do we do with them in the meantime? We added to this form a place to say, which ones are you going to use plan A? Which ones are you going to use plan C? And then also, what exactly does that look like? How do you plan A? The student Billy doesn't do his homework. How do you plan A that? You can't go home and hold Billy's hand and make him do his homework. So what does plan A look like? Does it look like detentions? That might be really different than other versions of plan A. So that's the addition of the new version that I just put in there for you, but lots of people still use that old one and it's perfectly fine to do so.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, Melody, did you have something that you wanted to toss in the ring about assessment?
Well, when you ask about, personal experiences with FBAs or any kind of, especially behavioral monitoring, I think is more difficult because we're very academically minded, and as you said before, some of the preconceived notions about behavior. So I would have to say that one of the difficulties is that we're not all on the same page. If you have somebody who's a behavioral specialist or a learning disability specialist, or maybe even not then, but most of the time I've found that people have studied a great deal about behavior overall, about learning disabilities and how the behavioral aspects related to learning disabilities, where, again, this has been my experience, regular classroom teachers and parents, because they've, lots of times if I was when I was teaching middle school, by the time I got those kids, those parents had been through quite a few different strategies, let's say, with different people in schools or outside of schools. So again, I just think that, everybody, as much as possible, being able to be on the same page, whether that's through training or, supervision by administrators. I mean, I've had administrators that had no idea what I was talking about.
Well,
so I mean, we're really paddling. We're paddling against the rapids when you got an administrator that has no clue, that this work has been done.
Well,
right?
I think, Melody, that one of the things
he doesn't need an FBA. He knows how to behave.
Yeah. So Melody, I think one of the things you're speaking to here is trying to get people on the same page. I think it's really hard to get people on the same page when people are speaking different languages and coming from different perspectives or mindsets, and then suggesting different interventions. So this is part of why some of our most important work is the first part of what we talked about today, trying to get people on board with a unifying philosophy, mindset first, because you're never going to speak the same language or suggest the same interventions if you're approaching it from a different mindset in the first place. Let's take on one more submitted question here. Somebody had asked us a really good question about let's see, where is it? How could you help a school to understand a student's struggles when the student is, they said, too embarrassed to let to let people see the frustration in class? And I'll expand that a little bit to basically say, what if there's a lot of evidence to certain people that there are challenges here, but other people are saying, wow, this kid looks fine in my class or in this school or last year or et cetera. And I think this appears in the book as well, but it's a good reminder. We need to remember here that it's not about people having a skill or not having a skill. It's about your ability to apply a skill when it's most needed. And our ability to apply our skills is entirely dependent on the context we are in, and as a result, our brain state. When we are what people have been calling well-regulated, we have full access to our skills. And in other instances, when we're dysregulated, we don't, which is why kids can look very different from moment to moment, day to day, class to class. Now, getting back to the particular question, I think we also need to just acknowledge something here, which is every single one of us behaves better out in the world than we do when there are less people looking at us. And it's not because you don't care about how you look at home, for instance. It's just that we work overtime to be able to hold ourselves together when there's a lot of eyes on us. And the reality is, sadly, for a lot of kids, what that means is they end up leaving school entirely depleted because they've spent all of their emotional and cognitive energy holding it together. And this is a real challenge for parents because, I've worked with a lot of parents that say, like, the minivan door has not even shut at the pickup line and it's getting ugly because they just didn't have anything left. And yet at school, it may look, yeah, they're doing really well. I didn't have a problem with them at all today. And this gets back to Melody's point of, well, how can we come together on this? Sharing a philosophy that doesn't blame other people and values people's perspectives and says, you know what, it's possible, it's quite possible that he looks okay at school and it's taking a tremendous toll upon him. Let's hear what this is about. And let's remember, this is probably about skill, not will. All right, let's see if anybody else, maybe one more. Yeah.
Hey, Stuart, I just want to note that something came through the chat to us from Alisha, who makes a great point, and that's about the word expectations. That can be a loaded word in some settings. Some people, and I worked in a place like this, that's not our expectation. And adults kind of use that word really to mean you're misbehaving. And yet with collaborative problem solving, it can be hard when folks from a setting that uses the word expectations to really just primarily mean behavioral expectations. When we say expectations, we actually mean a different thing, which is not behavioral expectations in the like, here are the behavioral expectations. Don't spit, don't swear, don't leave the class without permission. No, that's just not engaging in challenging behaviors. When we talk about expectations, and we go into great detail in the book in these chapters, and it's either chapter 3 or chapter 4, about what the difference is between unmet expectations and challenging behaviors. The unmet expectations are very simple, the neutral things that we ask a student to do. Sit in their seat, complete the homework, right? All of these things that we're asking a student to do over the course of the day. Now, if they refuse to do their work, or if they get out of their seat and run around the classroom, those are the challenging behaviors that they're engaging in because they couldn't meet the expectations. So it's almost like we have our little vernacular here with that word expectations. And in some places, it takes a real conscious switch because in some places that word is loaded. So I think that's a really great point, Alisha. I'm glad that you brought it up and gave us a chance to clarify the difference in the way that we're using that word. Deborah Ann, did you have something to add to that? And then I know timing wise, we'll need to move on to part 3.
Just real quick, I wanted to talk about the need for policy change. As a parent that had that situation where my kid held it together at school, but not at home. So it's kind of like, well, we're not seeing it in 2 settings, so it must be something you're doing. And if you would just do it right, then this wouldn't be happening. And so the need for policy change to change quicker so that we can intervene more when they're in the general ed class before they get kicked down the road to special ed. Because I find that this is mostly embraced in special ed, and we need the general education arena to also understand this so we don't kick them down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you speak to that from firsthand experience, Deborah Ann. So thank you for sharing that. So look, before we move on here, I just want to circle back to saying, if you're trying to get a school to understand that a kid is struggling, even though they may not see it, what you've got to do is you've got to share what things are looking like outside of school and why you think that's happening and what your kid is struggling or a student is struggling with during this course of the day, while still managing to keep it together. That ends up sort of depleting their resources entirely. All right, we're going to shift to the last part here. And the last part has to do with the 3 plans, and Alisha was touching upon them earlier. Real quick review. One of my favorite things about collaborative problem solving is I think that it takes complicated stuff and makes it a little easier to grasp onto. Simpler. And I always say, don't confuse simple with easy, because not easy, but it's simple. And the 3 plans help make behavior intervention planning simpler. And why is that? Well, because at the end of the day, what we say is you only got 3 options for how to handle a problem. Whatever the problem is, whatever expectation a student isn't meeting, you only got 3 options. And those are your 3 plans: plan A, plan B, and plan C. And when I explain this to people, I say this is true in life with anybody, with any problem. You've got 3 options. You can try to make the person do what you want them to do. You can try to solve the problem together with the person, or you can drop your expectation or solve it the way they want it solved. And those are your 3 options. Plan A, try to impose your will. Plan B, collaborative problem solving. Plan C, drop it, at least for now. And what, the nice thing about behavior intervention planning and collaborative problem solving is that what we say to people is, look, how are you going to know which of these 3 options to use? Depends what you're trying to accomplish. And we covered this in the book, that, when do you use plan A? Well, when you are insisting on getting your expectation met, come hell or high water. Even if it dysregulates the kid, even if it gets ugly, even if your relationship with them takes a hit, but you need the expectation met and can impose your will, you might choose to do plan A. When would you do plan C? When your goal is keeping a kid calm. And you're not solving the problem, you're not getting your expectations met, you're not working on things, but you are keeping a kid calm. And you can't work on everything all at once, i.e. you can't do plan B for everything. So some things have to be A or C. So you're going to have to decide. And yes, plan B is a way to address your expectations while keeping a kid calm and building a relationship and practicing skills. So of course, that would be your go-to option. But like I just said, you can't do plan B for everything. So a good behavior intervention plan is a list of those triggers and unmet expectations and saying, where are we going to start? Let's pick something to start with here to get plan B off the ground. But everything else on our list, it's got to be A or C by default. So the nice thing about only having 3 options, if you can only do plan B for a couple, everything else has got to be A or C. And then people always say, well, how do we decide? Depends what's more important. Getting your expectation met, even if it gets ugly, do plan A. Keeping them calm, even if your expectation doesn't get met, do C. For now, and hopefully some of those things are going to get your attention in plan B once you've solved some other problems first. So there's a lot of misconceptions about the plans. There's a lot of clarifications that we often make with folks. Those are listed in the book for you, the most common misconceptions. Happy to go over some of them now, but in the interest of time, let's open it up here and see what questions, comments you have, clarifications you'd like.
Jenny, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually wonder if it would be helpful to hear about some of the misconceptions. I'm struggling a little bit with plan A. and what that looks like. And to me, kind of the kind of application of a consequence versus imposing my will, and is there a difference? The idea that there's, you know, this challenging behavior that we're kind of not able to get to right now. Maybe it's not that low-hanging fruit. Maybe it's not, there's not a lot of relationship built yet. Some of those reasons we sort of hold off on digging in with plan B. What can plan A look like, particularly if I don't have a relationship built? It isn't about safety, but we're needing to kind of hold off on what that might be. Maybe it's like I'll give an example, like home toys. Home toys aren't supposed to come to school. You know, so the home toys need to stay in the bag. I'm going to kind of, because it's kind of a big deal that the home toys come to school, we're going to make sure that for now, until we get this solved, until they stay at home, we're going to leave them in the bag. To me, that's sort of you know, you bring them to school, you know, as long as it's not you know, I'm not going to make a big deal. But is that plan A?
Yeah, so it's a great example because it's very simple. Plan C would be the kid brings them to school, and if the kid takes them out and plays with them and stuff like that, you say, hey, you know what, we're not working on that. We're going to let them use the toys. Our expectations are not being met. We're not working on any skills, but we're avoiding difficulty. That would be plan C. Plan A would be you have an expectation that they don't bring toys from home, and when they bring toys from home, you don't let them bring them into the classroom. You say they have to stay in the bag. Well, that's A. Or you take them away until the end of the day. And it's really important to know, plan A doesn't mean you're mean. Like, plan A doesn't have to be harsh. You can do what I call nice A. What does nice A look like? You know what? You know, we're not allowed to have the toys from home at school. So I'm going to take it and put it in my special drawer. And at the end of the day, when you're ready to go home, we can go to my special drawer and take it out. That is super nice, empathic, fat old plan A. It is still plan A. It's just super nice. Okay. And, you know, is that bad to do? I mean, you can't do plan B for everything. So no, it isn't. Maybe plan C is too distracting. All the other kids are distracted by the stuff the kid's bringing in. And maybe you've decided, you know what, it doesn't get too ugly. They're not thrilled about it, but my relationship doesn't take a huge hit. So we're going to do A for that for now. Now, what if you tried to say that to the kid and the kid was going to wrestle the toy out of your hand, was screaming and going nuts? And you decided, you know, maybe we'll let him bring the toy for now because I don't want to put up with that. And we just want to keep him calm for now. It's not that distracting until we work on it. That would be C. Does that help clarify, Jenny?
Yeah, the timing is what I, maybe a follow-up is, it's important to say it's going to go in my special drawer. If that's going to, if it's better than doing that, than plan C, it becomes distracting and then I have to have them put it in the drawer. I mean, or do you see what I mean?
I do see what you mean. And you know, this is one of the point was mentioned earlier about being proactive. The whole reason you don't want to decide what plan you're using in the heat of the moment is you lose the bang for your buck out of the plans. Because if you're going to end up using plan C, he just got all upset at you, you got flustered, everybody's days off to the bad start, you wasted a bunch of time, and you ended up having him have the toy. If you were going to do plan C, you might as well get the bang for your buck, which is keeping him calm and some relational enhancement in the first place. So what does this mean? You put bringing home toys to school on your list of problems to solve, and you decide as a team, how do you want to handle it? And if you say C, we all know, okay, when that toy is coming in tomorrow, guess what we're going to say? Nothing. Plan C. Okay. So yes, you're trying to decide ahead of time which of the plans you're using. All right, thank you for that great specific example because it brings it to life. It was Christine, were you next, I think, here?
Hi. So I love this program. I've been through both of the trainings and they were great. However, I am kind of a lone wolf in my building. I work in a program for students who struggle with self-regulation. It's a substantially separate program. So my question to you is that, of course, Plan A is sometimes faster when you know the student is actually going to comply. Although lots of times it leads into something a lot worse. So you kind of have to know that. Plan B is great, and I understand that kids are learning their skills through participating in Plan B with an adult, but it's so staff intensive. And at any given moment in my program of 60 kids, we could have 10 that need to have a Plan B. And we do not have the staff. We don't have the staff to Plan B with 2 kids at a time. Our staffing is so low. So do you have any creative ideas, or have any other programs or schools overcome that problem with staffing and Plan B?
Great question. Alisha, you want to take it? You want me to take it here? You want me to take it? Okay. So, you're in a challenging position because you've got a bunch of kids with lagging skills all together. It sounds like, if I heard you correctly, in the setting you're in, which means you're going to have a lot of problems a lot of the time. It's hard to be able to do that much problem solving. One thing that I'd be on the lookout for is, I'm guessing that you're having similar problems with many of the kids. And what that is leading to is the need to have 11 different Plan B conversations with 11 students who all tend to have trouble with a similar kind of thing. And so one thing you might shift to, which we talk about a little bit later in the book, is what we call group Plan B, which is don't have a problem-solving conversation with all 11 over the same problem. And even with 11 kids with a lot of lagging skills, you can have a problem-solving conversation where you're getting them together with you, all to try to work on a problem that impacts, influences, involves a bunch of them at the same time. So one thing I think, Christine, I'd like to flag with this, and later on when we get into the details of Plan B, I think we could walk through sort of what group Plan B would look like in this case. It's not magical, because look, you got a tough setting with lots of kids, and dysregulation is contagious. So one kid is dysregulating another kid, who's dysregulating a teacher, who's dysregulating another kid, and it's like you're off to the races. So there's no easy solution, but group Plan B may end up being helpful for you. And last thing I want to say about this is I want to highlight, reiterate what you pointed out, which is, Plan B, it ultimately is definitely a better use of time, but it does take time. And you do have to carve out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes to have that conversation. Now, I was down in Cape Cod this morning working with cops, and one of the cops said to me, he's like, I've learned the hard way. I'd rather talk to somebody for an hour, had a great accent, than wrestle with him for 15 minutes. You know what I'm saying, Doc? And I say, yeah, I know what you're saying. So it's a little bit of, I'd rather do 3 minutes of Plan B than 1 minute of Plan A that's going to keep recurring as well. But I'm not diminishing the challenge there. So more to come on that one.
And we'll get to, I'll call on Lynn, but I just want to, a little bit of reassurance. That is by far the #1 question that we get from folks working in schools, finding time for Plan B. And there are lots of creative ways to do it, but it is the #1 challenge. We're going to squeeze Lynn in just our last couple of minutes here. You'll be our last person for today, I think. Lynn, go ahead.
Just a quick question around the Plan B and the example that we had, because I thought that was a great example. Normally, we would try, I believe we would try and do a Plan B proactively. But in the situation where the student brings in the toy and you say, I'm going to put it in my special drawer, and they say no, if
Right.
There's an opportunity to do a Plan B there, would you?
Absolutely, yes. And
Okay.
This is one of the ways that you can save some time is if the kids escalate, it's going to take you a little time regardless. Even doing A right then is going to take you time. So you might as well do what we're going to talk about next time, which is emergency Plan B. And I'll tell you that we've done a lot of thinking about this at Think Kids. And if you talked to us 5 years ago, we would have said, you know what, you should be doing almost exclusively proactive Plan B. Only emergency B when you need it. Look, the times have necessitated a hell of a lot more emergency Plan B. these days because there's so much dysregulation, so many problems going on. So emergency B has become even more important in people's repertoire. And we're going to talk about how to do that. And you can do that. Let's flag that. We'll walk through exactly what that scenario will look like with that kid for emergency B. Okay.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome. Last, I just want to respond to one quick thing because I'm afraid we might lose sight of it. Somebody had chatted in something about what do you do when there's an adult, an educator who might be, their expectations might be really flexible, sort of fluid, even inconsistent, because they're trying to be very empathic or sensitive to where a kid's at given their trauma history. And what do you do about that? Because ironically, that can actually be tough for a kid. So I just want to highlight, Alisha talked about expectations before. There's a place in the book where we talk about there's a whole art to setting expectations, and they need to be clear, they need to be realistic, and they need to be developmentally appropriate. Okay, it's okay for expectations to change, but they've got to be clear, they've got to be realistic and developmentally appropriate. And finally, the last thing is they got to be taught to kids. And this is why I love working with like kindergarten teachers, because they repeat themselves 50 million times a day, because they know that you constantly got to tell kids what the expectations are, or there's no way in hell kindergartners are going to meet them. So you're like a broken record telling them again and again and again. And we can be doing more of that at the older grades all the way through high school as well. So I think we better wrap up here. Thank you for bringing these great questions and comments. The more specific examples you give us, the more we'll be able, I think, to work with these. This is a good kickoff, I think, Alisha. I'm excited.
Fantastic. And I've got a lot of very active stuff going on in the chat, a lot of very excited folks. So we hope that we sparked some excitement and some hope, because it's been a very challenging school year for everyone. There is hope, there are answers, and we really hope to see all these faces again in sessions 2 and 3.
So thanks for joining us, everybody. Great to see you all. Look forward to the next one. I'm excited to come back together with you all.
Thanks, everyone.
For joining us.
Bye-bye.